Well, it's very difficult to see how this would dissuade Xi Jinping. I mean, I think President Trump, as we opened, really, has made it clear that if you're a major superpower and you're powerful, you can basically do what you like. You don't have to ask the United Nations. You don't have to subscribe to international law. You just say, look, you justify that Iran is wrong, bad leadership, we're going to go in and sort it out. Well, in the same way, China will now feel, I think, emboldened.
What price has Russia had to pay to Iran for Iran's support? Has it transferred nuclear technology to Iran? And that's the other worrying thing.
Well, no, I think you're absolutely right. There's lots of different. I was going to just return briefly to your question, though, about the role of air power, because, I think we're seeing some of my army colleagues, you and I probably over the years have gone, yeah, air power can do this, but you need boots on the ground to provide permanence, to have, air power is transitory, boots is, and I don't see any appetite for putting boots on the ground. The other challenge with air power is we've seen over the last 24 hours, we watched 3 American F-15s get shot down by friendly fire. 3. One is unlucky, 2 a bit unfortunate, 3 all in quick succession. We've also
have you ever seen the Kuwaiti military operating? I'm sure you have.
Well, yeah, but I remember the Gulf War when we were flying out of Kuwait off to Iraq, and we were more worried about the American defense systems as we came back home than we were about the Iraqi system. It's also worth pointing out that, of course, Kuwait is a relatively small country. There's not that much airspace there to play with. Most of the military jets flying around are flying the same sort of speed as the cruise missiles or whatever. And because Iran is launching lots of stuff, and you haven't had much time to train to make sure you've got a really well coordinated, it isn't a great surprise. Luckily, all the aircrew got out. And I was relieved to hear that Qatar actually managed to shoot down 2 Fencer aeroplanes. And I think one of the questions I'd have was, where is the Iranian Air Force in all of this? Now, they're flying antiques. The Fencers that were shot down are 1960s vintage. They're my vintage. So they're not very capable. But even so, you'd have thought that you have an Air Force for the time you're going to fight a battle. But the reality is the Iranian Air Force is not doing anything, clearly being very effectively shot down by Qatar. That's also using its air defense missiles to shoot down a whole load of ballistic missiles and drones as well. So it's a complicated picture, but in answer to your question, no, I do not believe air power alone will be able to enable regime change in Iran.
Yeah, you say Fencer's your era. The SR-71 is your era as well, and you're more an SR-71 man in technology terms from that period of time. For those that don't know what the SR-71 is, it's that Blackbird, the spy plane that flies on the edge of space. That the Americans had. That can one of the most fascinating videos I've seen is whenever it's sitting there beside I think there were some F-15s or F-18s, and all of a sudden they decided to put their afterburners on, and the F-18s were at maximum thrust, and they just put his afterburners on and just disappeared away off into the horizon, which was fantastic. But yeah, it's fascinating to see everything, and I think the majority of the Iranian Air Force has been destroyed on the ground. It's incapable of flying because it can't be serviced and everything else. And Iran is going to rely more and more on its missile capability, whilst it's still got a coherent military. Yesterday they lost 11 ships because the Americans concentrated on them, and that missile capability, once that starts to get denuded, then they're going to have to go to more asymmetric tactics, and that's when the really worrying stuff, I think, will happen, not just regionally but across the world.
But the other question, if I would bounce back to you, I'd say, what do you see the role of Israel in this? Because there is a sense at the moment that Israel's got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to degrade Iran, and the danger is, when does that stop being just retribution rather than a measured view? Because the further you denude Iranian's military capability, the more you potentially kill civilians, the more potentially you turn Iranians against America and Israel, rather than being seen as the liberators. There is a time here where I think prudence might be very powerful. I'm just wondering how that's going to happen.
Well, and again, the one thing that Iran's response to the initial attacks has done is it's united the countries across the Middle East in a way that they've never been united before because they've all been attacked. But if we then get into, as you say, a longer game where there's more civilian targets, that Iran starts to look more like Gaza looks and all the rest of it, then that support is going to wane very, very quickly indeed. And Israel's got an opportunity, but I think the opportunity here would be a proper regime change. And the one thing that is a little glimmer of hope, it's no more than a little spark that you see flashing every now and again, is unlike Libya and Iraq, actually there is a potential government in waiting that could come in that's been planning for something like this for many, many years. And that's the son of the Shah of Iran, who has got a plan to bring in a constitutional type monarchy with free and fair democratic elections across Iran. But the conditions are not right with the government, with the replacement for the Grand Ayatollah, because there's still relatively senior and coherent structures within the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and within the religious structure that's there that has supported the government. So they have to go through several machinations of that before that is dismantled. And whilst that's still there, then the people in Iran can't rise up. And I'm not getting any impression that there is something stimulating them and getting them ready to rise up. I'd hope that Israeli and US intelligence services are on the ground and trying to stir that up. Otherwise, regime change isn't going to happen. Full stop.
No, and I do think that sometimes you and I are old enough to know that these things are often not black and white, that they are shades of grey. And if you go from a regime that's the Ayatollah, hard line, hard over, in an ideal world, maybe from a Trump perspective, the whole regime disappears. But actually, if you simply create a set of conditions where the dial is turned a bit, and all of a sudden the new regime may still be pretty brutal, but actually recognises that it can't be as hard line as their predecessors, then maybe you see an evolution rather than a revolution. Maybe you see the country starting to walk a slightly different path. And I do think I'm old enough. I'm not an idealist. I'm a pragmatist, and that's why I was quite hopeful at the time that once the Ayatollah was dead and the key leadership, that just seemed like a window of opportunity now to pause and potentially see a more positive path. The further we go down this, Trump doesn't win because of the midterm elections. He's been trying to leave his legacy as the president of peace. Well, he's just caused the biggest carnage in the Middle East for generations. And we've seen, so far, I think it's only 4 US servicemen died. But the longer this goes on, Iran only has to be lucky once. And all of a sudden, you end up with a very different narrative. And the longer this goes on, the more likely that is, it appears to me, to happen.
So with America potentially running out of weapons, and it's high value weapons and all the rest of it because it's using them here, what do you think Xi Jinping is going to do with regard to Taiwan? Do you think he's biding his time and suddenly going, I've now got a window of opportunity myself as a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations to go and do something?
Well, it's very difficult to see how this would dissuade Xi Jinping. I mean, I think President Trump, as we opened, really, has made it clear that if you're a major superpower and you're powerful, you can basically do what you like. You don't have to ask the United Nations. You don't have to subscribe to international law. You just say, look, you justify that Iran is wrong, bad leadership, we're going to go in and sort it out. Well, in the same way, China will now feel, I think, emboldened. And I think if you look at the US national security strategy, it paints China less as an enemy and more of America focused on the sort of Western hemisphere and its interest in the West, China focused on the Eastern hemisphere, and Middle Earth, Russia and Europe fight for that middle ground. And I think China will, I'm pretty sure, they'll feel emboldened because America has now set the ground rules. It's very difficult for America to complain about China going to Taiwan when it's been walking into countries sweeping aside international law. And I think if I was the Chinese leadership, you'd believe that you're going to go into Taiwan eventually. So the question is when? And actually, you need to seize windows of opportunity when the pain is likely to be at the minimum. And at the moment, it would feel, goodness knows, none of us want to see this happen, but it feels like one of those windows has opened up. And therefore, I wouldn't be at all surprised if China's going, is this the time?
And finally, because I think we're coming towards the end of our time, What does this all mean for Middle Earth, as you described it, but the war that's going on in Middle Earth between Russia and Ukraine? What does all this mean for Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, with a limited time, I think, as we go into the fifth year, I think if you and I, when we first started talking about this conflict, it was Ukraine's not in NATO. Why has it got anything to do with us? We'll try and help them out a bit. If you now look at the way that world has divided up, the collapse of the international order, actually, you can see Russia and Ukraine being an existential fight for the European mainland in the way that history guides us. And can we rely on America's help to help sort it out if it was to go worse? I think our confidence has reduced that that's the case. I think we're not the United States of Europe, but we've got to find a way of operating more closely together from a military perspective, because divided, we are very vulnerable. Together, we could be incredibly powerful. And finally, I think, we as an island nation, we've still got remnants of our empire, as you said, British sovereign bases around the world. But now we've left the European Union. It's very difficult to see where our economy is thriving. Where is the growth? Where's the engine? We've suddenly found ourselves to be an island, not only politically, but also militarily and geographically. And I do think we've got to work out where we sit in the world, because the number one priority for any government is defending our people. And at the moment, I think we're more vulnerable today than we've been in a generation. And that is a major challenge for the government and us in the public to address.
Well, on that note, and I have to agree with you, Sean Bell, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today on Frontline.
Thanks, Phil. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for watching Frontline. Now, in case you haven't heard, we've got our own channel now. So please subscribe whenever subscriptions start again. But of course, you can still listen to us if you want to on Times Radio at 01:35 hours in the morning, Greenwich Mean Time. But that is 20:35 Eastern Standard Time for those in the United States. And of course, please put your comments in and share our link with your friends. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.